Victoria Blackwood sat rigid in the plush sterile chair beside her daughter's bed, her fingers trembling as she gripped Isabella's tiny hand. The once vibrant girl, now pale and frail, lay motionless in the hospital bed, her face drawn with fever and exhaustion. Every beep from the machines surrounding her felt like a hammer striking the walls of Victoria's mind, each one marking the loss of hope. Dr. Mitchell, the head doctor of Mount Sinai Hospital, stood by the door, his posture stiff and professional. But his eyes betrayed the hopelessness of the situation. "I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do," he said softly, as though the words would somehow soften the blow. "Her condition is beyond medical intervention. We've given her the best of what's available, but at this point, it's a matter of time." The words didn't hit Victoria's ears the way they should have. They felt like a distant echo, lost in the panic swirling in her chest. She had money, endless money, and there was no situation too dire for her to fix with a checkbook. But this was different. She wasn't in control. She wasn't in command. The very thing that had built her empire, her wealth, was powerless here. Her daughter, her beloved Isabella, wasn't just another patient. She wasn't just the daughter of a billionaire heiress, a little girl destined to have everything. No, she was Victoria's world. She was her heart, her reason for everything. And to hear that no amount of money or influence could save her, Victoria felt the walls of her carefully built empire begin to crack. One devastating thought at a time, as the doctor spoke, his voice blurring into the background, Victoria couldn't help but stare at her daughter, who lay there with her eyes half closed. Isabella's small chest rose and fell with labored breaths, each one weaker than the last. In a way, Victoria envied her daughter's oblivion, her lack of understanding of the world they had just been thrust into. Her thoughts were interrupted by Dr. Mitchell, who cleared his throat. "We've done everything we can, Mrs. Blackwood. The medication she's on, the experimental treatment. It's been our last hope." Victoria's gaze snapped back to the doctor, her eyes burning with desperation. "Is there anything else we can try? What about more trials? Other doctors?" Dr. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding hers. "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Blackwood, but we've mobilized the top experts, the finest treatment available, ... And I hate to say it, but we've run out of options." Victoria's chest tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to lash out at the universe that had dealt this blow to her family. But instead, her voice broke as she whispered, "There must be something else, something we haven't tried." Dr. Mitchell hesitated before speaking again. "There's one more possibility," he said, his voice lowering. "There's an experimental drug still in the testing phase. It's not yet approved for use. The trials are promising, but the FDA approval process is slow, and we can't expedite it. We don't even have access to it yet, not even through your connections." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "And what do you mean by not even through my connections? Do you understand who I am?" The doctor flinched, but he didn't back down. "I'm not questioning your influence, Mrs. Blackwood. But sometimes, even money can't move mountains. This is a bureaucratic process, and we're talking about human lives here." Victoria's mind raced. She had spent her life building bridges, breaking down walls, and wielding her wealth like a sword to carve her own path in the world. But now, it felt like all of that was slipping through her fingers. She was powerless in this moment, powerless against a disease that money couldn't cure. Out the window, she saw movement in the hospital's courtyard. A young boy, barely more than a child, stood there, his face partially obscured by shadows. He was staring at the window, his eyes locked with hers. For a brief second, their gazes met, strange, intense, unspoken, and Victoria felt a shiver run down her spine. Outside, Jamal, a 12-year-old boy from the streets, leaned against the wall, his eyes tracing the movements inside the hospital. He knew this place better than anyone. Not because he was a patient, he could never afford private treatment, but because it was where he could scavenge leftovers from the kitchen trash. And when it rained, it was where he could hide. He wasn't supposed to be here. He knew that, but somehow, he always found himself near the hospital. He didn't belong to this world of doctors and million-dollar treatments. He didn't belong to this world of privilege and despair. Yet, As he stared up at the third floor, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was happening here, something he couldn't ignore. Victoria's gaze lingered on the boy. His presence felt like an anomaly, a blip in the otherwise well-maintained, perfectly orchestrated environment of the hospital. He wasn't supposed to be there. Yet, something about him made her pause. There was a calmness in his eyes, an unspoken understanding, as if he knew something she didn't. Before she could turn away, Jamal's eyes flicked toward hers, and in that moment, Victoria felt a connection, a strange, inexplicable connection with this boy. She didn't know why, she didn't understand it, but there was something about him that tugged at her heart. The night air outside Mount Sinai Hospital was thick with the sound of distant traffic and the low hum of city lights. Jamal stood near the service entrance, his back pressed against the cold stone wall of the hospital, his eyes focused on the windows above. He was used to being invisible in places like this, but tonight felt different. It was as if the world around him had shifted, and he was caught between two realities, the one where he belonged, on the outside looking in, and the one where he could see, maybe even change. The course of a life inside Jamal was no stranger to hardship. At just 12 years old, he had already seen more of life's cruelty than most adults. His family couldn't afford the luxury of medical care, let alone the kind that Victoria Blackwood's daughter was receiving. His mother worked long hours cleaning offices and homes, barely making enough to keep them afloat. And Jamal? Well, he survived however he could, collecting discarded food from trash cans behind restaurants, finding shelter wherever he could, and learning the ways of the world from people who had nothing but each other to rely on. But this hospital, with its gleaming white walls and polished floors, felt like a world apart. To Jamal, it was a fortress of wealth and privilege, one he could never breach. The only time he'd stepped inside was when he had snuck in to scavenge leftover food from the cafeteria, or to escape the rain when it was pouring too hard to stay on the streets. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling being so close to a world that seemed to have everything, yet knowing he'd never belong in it. The sharp voice of a security guard broke through his thoughts. "Hey kid," Harrison barked, walking toward him with an air of authority. "Get out of here. This isn't a place for street rats." Jamal didn't flinch. He had heard it all before, the insults, the orders to leave, the judgment. He had learned long ago how to take it all without letting it show on his face. Just looking around, Jamal muttered, standing up slowly, "You don't belong here. There's nothing for you." "Go," Harrison said, his voice tinged with disgust. Jamal didn't argue. Instead, he moved toward the back of the building, slipping through an alley that ran along the side of the hospital. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement. Jamal's mind wandered back to the girl he had seen through the window, the little girl who had captured his attention in a way he couldn't explain. Isabella, even though he had only caught a glimpse of her, he felt a strange connection. She wasn't like the rich people in the hospital. She wasn't just a spoiled child surrounded by luxury. No, there was something more to her. Something lonely about her gaze that mirrored his own. He had seen that look before on the faces of people like him. People who had nothing but still somehow carried the weight of the world in their eyes. As Jamal walked, he passed by a small garden at the back of the hospital. The plants were carefully tended, their bright colors standing out against the dull gray of the city. Jamal paused, inspecting the leaves of a few plants growing near the edge. His grandmother had taught him everything he knew about herbs and natural healing. She had been a respected healer in their community, using plants to treat everything from colds to stomachaches. She had never believed in the fancy medications that the doctors pushed, always insisting that nature had a remedy for everything. If you just knew where to look. Jamal's fingers brushed over the leaves as he remembered her words. Healing isn't about what's in a bottle or a fancy prescription. It's about understanding what the body needs and giving it the tools to heal itself. He had spent years learning from her, gathering herbs, making potions, understanding how the body reacted to different plants. It was knowledge passed down through generations. Knowledge that the doctors in the hospital, with their fancy degrees and titles, couldn't possibly understand. As Jamal stood there, absorbed in his thoughts, He overheard a conversation between two nurses who had stepped out for a cigarette break. Their voices floated on the night air, carrying with them the weight of something Jamal hadn't expected to hear. "It's such a shame," said Rebecca, the older nurse. "She's just a little girl. But at least she's getting the best treatment money can buy, right?" Janet, the younger nurse, snorted, tossing her cigarette onto the ground. "Best treatment? You mean experimental treatment that hasn't even been properly tested? They didn't even check her liver levels before they started her on that drug cocktail. It's all about the money, isn't it? The richer the patient, the more they're willing to pump into the system." Jamal stood completely still, his heart pounding in his chest. The conversation echoed in his mind. Isabella wasn't just getting the best treatment, she was being used as a test case. A subject in an experiment, a project, and the worst part, the treatment wasn't even working. It was making her worse. He had heard enough. He wasn't sure how, but Jamal knew in that moment that he had to do something. He couldn't just stand by and let this happen, not when he knew there was another way. His grandmother's teachings were clear. Nature always provided a way. But it took someone who truly understood it to unlock its potential. Jamal turned and started walking toward the back of the hospital again, his mind racing with ideas. He needed to talk to someone who would listen. He had overheard enough to know that the people inside the hospital didn't care about the truth, only about their research, their profits, their status. But Jamal had something the doctors didn't: the wisdom of the streets. He had the knowledge of someone who had been forced to learn how to survive without the comfort of luxury. And that knowledge, those simple yet powerful remedies his grandmother had taught him, might just be the key to saving Isabella's life. Jamal had always been good at observing. He had learned the art of staying in the background, blending into his surroundings until he was no longer noticed. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, he wasn't just watching, he was learning. He stood at the edge of the hospital's botanical garden, hidden in the shadows, his back pressed against a stone wall. The voices of the nurses were still ringing in his ears, but now they were more than just background noise. They were revelations, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was meant to solve. He had overheard enough in the past few days to understand that Isabella's condition wasn't just due to the disease, it was the treatment that was killing her. Jamal knew what to look for. The subtle signs, the symptoms, the patterns in the way the body reacted to certain chemicals. It was all information his grandmother had drilled into him over the years. She had never trusted modern medicine. To her, true healing came from the earth, from the plants and herbs that grew in the cracks of the city streets. But as Jamal stood there, thinking, he knew that his knowledge alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to reach someone who would listen, someone who had the authority to make a difference. He had overheard two nurses discussing Isabella's treatment, and their words had hit him like a punch to the stomach. They weren't just treating her, they were experimenting on her. Jamal could feel his frustration building, but he kept his emotions in check. He couldn't afford to act impulsively. He had to be careful. If he did anything too reckless, they would throw him out of the hospital for good, and he would never get the chance to save Isabella. As Jamal stood deep in thought, he didn't notice Dr. Mitchell, the lead doctor on Isabella's case, walking by. The doctor's face was pale, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he muttered to himself. He was too distracted by his thoughts to notice the young boy standing just a few feet away. Inside, in the sterile, whitewashed halls of the hospital, Victoria Blackwood paced back and forth in her daughter's room, unable to sit still. She had been told, over and over, that there was nothing more they could do. She had been told that her daughter's illness was too advanced, that the treatment was failing, and that there was no hope. But the words didn't make sense to her. Isabella was only 7. How could a life so young be snuffed out so easily? As she turned to face Isabella's bed once more, her eyes caught the faintest glimpse of movement outside the window. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat as she saw the figure of a young boy, Jamal, standing just outside, peering into her daughter's room. Victoria froze. She wasn't sure why, but there was something about his presence that felt unsettling. She had noticed him earlier, outside the hospital, and now he was here, staring at her daughter. It was as though he knew something she didn't. For a brief second, their eyes met. There was a strange serenity in his gaze, as though he held a secret, a truth she wasn't privy to. She felt a chill run down her spine, but before she could react, he was gone. "Dr. Mitchell," Victoria called urgently, her voice trembling. "My daughter is talking about a boy she's never met before. She says he'll help her." "What does that mean?" Dr. Mitchell turned toward her, his face tight with the strain of the long hours he had spent trying to save Isabella. He sighed and walked over to her side. "It's common for children at this stage to experience delirium," he said, his voice clinical. "Their minds create comforting images to ease their fears. This boy she's referring to, it's just part of the process." Victoria wasn't convinced. "But this is different. She's never mentioned anyone like him before. And why does she say he'll help her?" Dr. Mitchell was silent for a moment, his eyes flicking to Isabella, who was now murmuring in her sleep, her small hand clutching the bedsheet tightly. "I assure you, Mrs. Blackwood, there's nothing to worry about," he said, his voice tinged with impatience. "We've tried everything, and if we can't help her, it's because we're at the limit of what modern medicine can do. We've done all we can." Victoria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She couldn't accept that. She couldn't give up on Isabella. Meanwhile, Jamal was still outside, watching from a distance. He had seen enough, more than enough, to know that the doctors were lying to her. Isabella wasn't dying from her disease. She was dying from the very treatment they were giving her. And the worst part, they knew it. They knew the drugs weren't working, but they couldn't admit it. Admitting failure would destroy their careers, their reputations, and their multi-million-dollar research investments. Jamal's mind raced. He had no formal medical training. He wasn't a doctor, and he didn't have the resources to prove his theories. But he had something that they didn't. He had the knowledge passed down from his grandmother, hands-on knowledge about how plants could heal, how the body could be supported without relying on toxic chemicals. Jamal had never trusted the medical establishment. He had seen too many people on the streets, people who had been treated like disposable bodies, shoved aside by a system that cared more about profits than lives. And now, standing on the fringes of this sterile, whitewashed world of medicine, Jamal realized something profound. The people who needed saving were the ones who had always been ignored, the ones the system had always overlooked. People like him. Inside the hospital, Dr. Mitchell's frustration grew as he reviewed Isabella's blood test results. The numbers didn't add up. The levels of certain chemicals were rising, not falling. It should have been the opposite. "Something's wrong," he muttered, staring at the test results. But what could he do? He had no choice but to continue the treatment, or he would lose everything. His eyes darted to Victoria, who was still sitting beside Isabella, her face twisted with worry. He cleared his throat. "We'll make some adjustments to the treatment plan, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice betraying a hint of unease, "but I need you to trust that we're doing everything we can." Victoria looked at him, her eyes filled with an almost desperate hope. "Please," she whispered. "I'm begging you. Don't let her die." Dr. Mitchell didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. Jamal wasn't about to sit back and do nothing. He had seen too much, and now that he knew the truth, he couldn't walk away. He needed to get inside. He needed to find a way to help Isabella, but how? He wasn't allowed near the hospital. No one would listen to a boy like him, no matter how much he knew. Then it hit him. He needed an ally. He needed someone on the inside, someone who would listen to him. Jamal's eyes scanned the hospital grounds, and his mind raced. He knew exactly who he needed to talk to. The cold night air wrapped around Jamal as he sat on the weathered bench near the back entrance of Mount Sinai Hospital. His knees were drawn up to his chest, and his hands, calloused from years of hard living, rested on his legs. He hadn't moved from this spot all evening, his eyes fixed on the hospital windows above. Watching the lights flicker in the sterile white rooms, Jamal was lost in thought. His mind racing through everything he had learned in the past few days, the overheard conversations, the desperate looks in the doctor's eyes, and most of all, the silent scream of Isabella. He couldn't ignore the sense of urgency building within him. He had spent years observing, watching people, learning their behaviors, understanding what they didn't say. The nurses who thought they were alone, talking about liver toxicity. The disgruntled doctor who had confessed that he didn't know what was really happening to the patients they had, all given him pieces of the puzzle, pieces that didn't fit together with the treatment protocols he had heard about. Jamal had always believed that medicine wasn't just about formulas and chemicals. It was about understanding the body, the way it fought, the way it healed, and the way it sometimes rejected the very things meant to save it. His grandmother had instilled that belief in him from a young age. She had never put stock in the pills or injections that doctors prescribed. To her, the real power of healing lay in the plants, the herbs, the natural remedies that the city overlooked. Now, standing in the shadow of a hospital that symbolized the very thing his grandmother had fought against, arrogance and greed in medicine, Jamal couldn't sit idly by. He had seen enough. Isabella wasn't just a helpless child. She was a victim of a medical system that cared more about its reputation than the lives it was supposed to save. But there was something Jamal knew that the doctors didn't, something his grandmother had taught him, something they couldn't understand because they hadn't lived it. The answer wasn't in the sterile hospital rooms or the endless drugs. It was in nature. It was in the plants that grew in the forgotten corners of the city, the herbs that had been used for centuries to heal and protect the body. Jamal stood abruptly, his heart racing. He wasn't sure how, but he had to get inside. He couldn't wait any longer. His eyes scanned the area around him, and that's when he saw her, Alina Rodriguez, the hospital's night janitor. She was walking toward him, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "You've been sitting here a long time," Kid Alina remarked, stopping in front of him. Her voice was soft, but there was a warmth in it that Jamal hadn't expected. "Is everything all right?" Jamal didn't answer immediately. He had been too lost in his thoughts to notice her approaching, but now that she was here, something clicked inside him. Alina was different from the other hospital staff. She had been here for years, cleaning up the mess the doctors left behind, witnessing the things that the higher-ups didn't want people to see. Maybe, just maybe, she could help. "I need to get inside," Jamal said quietly, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I need to see Dr. Chen, the one who works the night shift." "Do you know her?" Alina raised an eyebrow, surprised by the directness of his request. "Dr. Chen? Yeah, I know her. She's one of the few doctors around here who actually gives a damn. But why would you need to talk to her?" Jamal didn't hesitate. "I know what's happening to Isabella. The treatment they're giving hurts, making her worse. They're killing her with the drugs. But I can help her. I know how to make it stop." Alina frowned, taking a step closer. "How do you know that?" "You're just a kid, Jamal. What do you know about medicine?" Jamal met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "My grandmother was a healer. She taught me everything I know about plants, about the body. I've seen the signs. The treatment they're giving Isabella is toxic. It's not the disease killing her, it's the medicine." Elena's face softened, her skepticism giving way to a cautious curiosity. She had seen the way Jamal had been paying attention, the way he had spoken about the plants in the garden earlier. There was something in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't just another street kid playing at being a doctor. He knew what he was talking about. But Alina also knew that helping Jamal would come with consequences. She had worked in this hospital long enough to see how things operated, how money and power influenced everything, even the lives of the patients. The last thing she wanted was to risk her job or worse by getting involved in something that could be as dangerous as it was noble. "I don't know." Jamal, Alina said softly. "You're talking about going against the doctors here. If they find out you're interfering, you'll be thrown out in a heartbeat. They'll never listen to a kid like you. But, ... She hesitated, her eyes scanning the area. "But if you really think you can help, then you need to talk to Dr. Chen. She's the only one here who actually cares. She might be the only one who will listen to you." Jamal nodded, his eyes lighting up with a flicker of hope. "I've heard enough about her. She's the one who won't just follow orders without thinking for herself. She might actually be willing to listen to me. Alina sighed, glancing around nervously. You know where to find her. She always has a coffee break at 2 a.m. in the back cafeteria. But, I'll warn you, she's not exactly easy to convince. If you want to get her to help you, you better have something more than just your words. You need proof. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. Proof. He had no formal medical knowledge, no documents to back up his claims. But he did have something else: his grandmother's notebook. It was filled with the secrets of natural healing. The knowledge that could save Isabella. I'll get it, Jamal said, his voice firm. I've got what I need. Alina gave him one last, searching look before nodding. All right. But you better be careful. This hospital is a big machine, and it doesn't take kindly to people messing with it. If you get caught, you're on your own. Jamal stood up, his resolve stronger than ever. I know what I have to do. I'm going to save her. The scene ends with Jamal walking away from Alina. His mind focused entirely on one thing: getting the information he needed to save Isabella. As he heads toward the hospital's back entrance, he knows the risks. He knows how much he's up against. But in his heart, he feels something deeper than fear. Determination. He's not just fighting for a girl he barely knows. He's fighting against a system that has ignored the people like him, people who know the power of the earth, of nature, and of healing without a price tag. And for the first time in his young life, Jamal believes he has the chance to change everything. The hospital was quieter now, the usual flurry of activity fading into the backdrop of the night shift. Jamal sat on a bench outside, his legs folded beneath him, his mind racing with thoughts that refused to slow down. He knew that time was running out for Isabella. Every second felt like an eternity, a moment slipping further and further away from the one thing that could save her. The truth, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone who could help him. Someone who would understand what he had learned from his grandmother. Someone who would trust him enough to listen. And that someone, Jamal hoped, was Dr. Chen. He had heard enough in the whispers of the night shift workers to know that Dr. Chen was different. While most of the doctors at Mount Sinai were consumed with research, prestige, and the high-stakes world of experimental treatments, Dr. Chen was the rare exception. She wasn't just a doctor, she was a healer, someone who truly cared about her patients. She wasn't blinded by the pharmaceutical protocols that controlled the hospital's decisions. She was driven by a sense of compassion, and it was that compassion Jamal needed. He glanced at his watch. It was 1:30 a.m. He had half an hour to make his move. He had already spent hours walking the hospital grounds, making sure he wasn't being watched, preparing himself to meet Dr. Chen. He couldn't afford to mess this up. The night felt thick with anticipation. He could feel it in his chest, in the pit of his stomach, like a pressure building inside him. He had been so sure of his grandmother's wisdom, the knowledge she had shared with him about healing plants and natural remedies. But this wasn't just a matter of herbs and leaves anymore. This was life or death. Jamal took a deep breath, then stood and started walking toward the back cafeteria. He passed through the dimly lit hallways, the sterile smell of antiseptic in the air. It was eerily quiet at this time of night, with only the occasional murmur of voices coming from far-off rooms. But Jamal's focus was singular. He had one goal: to get Dr. Chen to listen. When he reached the cafeteria, he found it empty, save for Dr. Chen, who sat at a small table near the corner, sipping from a cup of coffee. She had a stack of patient files in front of her, but her eyes were tired. The weight of the work, the long hours, the pressure of being the one doctor who actually cared. It was all evident in the slump of her shoulders and the lines etched into her face. Jamal hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding. He knew this was his one chance. Dr. Chen, he called out, his voice quiet but determined. She looked up from the papers in front of her, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the sight of Jamal standing in the doorway. She didn't seem surprised to see him, as if she had been expecting him. She set her coffee down and gestured for him to come closer. Jamal, right. The kid who's been hanging around outside, she said softly, her voice warm but cautious. Jamal nodded, his hands slightly shaking. I need to talk to you, he said. About Isabella Blackwood. Dr. Chen's expression shifted ever so slightly. She knew who Isabella was, everyone at the hospital did. But she hadn't expected to hear from someone like Jamal, a street kid with no formal education, no qualifications. Still, something in her gut told her that he wasn't just another kid off the street with an outrageous claim. Sit down, she said, motioning to the seat across from her. But this better be good. Jamal, I'm not sure what you think you can tell me about Isabella's treatment that I don't already know. Jamal sat down slowly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she hadn't expected. He opened the worn notebook he always carried with Hammet's pages filled with his grandmother's handwritten notes on herbs, plants, and healing remedies. I know what's happening to Isabella, he said, his voice steady now. The treatment she's been getting, it's not working. In fact, it's making her worse. She's not dying from the disease. She's dying from the drugs they're giving her. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow, skeptical, but intrigued. What are you talking about? The experimental protocol we're using, it's the latest in cancer treatment. It's being tested all over the world. The results are promising. Jamal leaned forward, his eyes intense. The treatment is toxic. I know because I've seen it before. My grandmother was a healer. She taught me everything about the body, about how plants can heal when the body's been poisoned by medicine. Dr. Chen glanced down at the notebook. In front of him, her gaze lingering on the handwritten notes that filled the pages. There was something about the way Jamal spoke, the quiet confidence in his voice, that made her pause. She had spent years studying the human body, years training at the best medical institutions. But here was a kid, a boy from the streets, who seemed to know things that her education hadn't prepared her for. She looked back at him, her face softening. You really believe that? She asked, her voice quieter now, filled with curiosity. Jamal nodded, his voice unwavering. I know it, I've seen it. You've been treating her with chemicals that are killing her liver. The medicine they're using is poisoning her, and I know what can help. But you have to listen to me. Dr. Chen sat back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Jamal's. She had always been the kind of doctor who questioned everything, who pushed the boundaries of medical science. But this was different. She had never heard anything like it from a child, from someone who didn't even have the privilege of a formal education. Tell me, she said, leaning forward, her voice serious. What do you think we should do? Jamal's eyes brightened. We stop the treatment. The drugs are killing her. What she needs is a detoxification. Natural herbs that will help her body recover. Dr. Chen's brow furrowed, and she looked at the notebook again. You're suggesting that we stop the experimental protocol and use... What? These plants? Jamal nodded. Yes. My grandmother taught me about the plants that can heal when the body is poisoned. I can show you how to use them. There was a long silence as Dr. Chen processed what Jamal had said. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning, and all that mattered was the weight of the decision in front of her. She had spent her career following established protocols, trusting the science and research that had guided her practice. But here was a child, no credentials, no training, offering something so radically different. Finally, Dr. Chen stood up, her decision made. If you're serious about this, Jamal, you'll need to prove it. I'll help you, but we're doing this my way. We'll need to test it, document everything. And if anything goes wrong, I take full responsibility. Jamal stood too, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and hope. Thank you, Dr. Chen. You won't regret this. She nodded, a determined look on her face. I hope not, but we'll do this together, for Isabella. The tension in the hospital had been growing for days, and Jamal could feel it in the air, thick and heavy. Every step he took through the sterile hallways, every glance he received from the hospital staff, seemed laced with suspicion. He had seen what they had done to Isabella, and now that he had a way to help her, he couldn't back down. Not now. Dr. Chen was with him every step of the way, following his lead as they carefully worked to stop the experimental treatment and replace it with a natural detoxification process. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when both of them felt the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Dr. Mitchell had warned them that there would be consequences if they stopped the treatment, but neither Jamal nor Dr. Chen was willing to let Isabella's life slip away at the hands of a flawed system. Tonight, the hospital felt especially cold. The usual buzz of activity had slowed, and the building seemed almost silent, like a giant waiting to spring into action at the first sign of trouble. Jamal had no intention of causing trouble, but he couldn't ignore the facts. Isabella wasn't getting better, she was deteriorating at an alarming rate. And if they didn't act quickly, she might not make it through the night. He moved quietly through the halls, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced with thoughts of Isabella, of the girl who had been given one day to live but was still hanging on, fighting against all odds. He had to do something. He had to expose what was happening, not just to Isabella, but to everyone who had been failed by this system. But he also knew he couldn't do it alone. As Jamal approached Isabella's room, he saw Dr. Mitchell standing outside, his arms crossed, his expression tense. The moment Jamal's eyes met the doctor's, Dr. Mitchell's gaze hardened. "You shouldn't be here," Dr. Mitchell said coldly, his voice low and threatening. "I told you before, this is not your place. You've caused enough trouble." Jamal didn't flinch. He knew the doctor's words were meant to intimidate, but he had seen this kind of arrogance before. It was the same kind of arrogance that had led to the mistreatment of countless people like him, people who were invisible to the system, who had no voice, no power. But now, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't afraid. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Jamal said firmly, his voice steady. "I'm here to save her." Dr. Mitchell scoffed. "Save her? With what? Your street knowledge? Your grandmother's herbs? You're not a doctor, boy. You don't belong here." Jamal stepped closer, his eyes burning with determination. "What you're doing to her is killing her. It's not the disease, it's the drugs. She's not a test case for your research. She's a little girl, and you're letting her die." Dr. Mitchell's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about. This treatment is the best we have. It's been approved by the finest institutions in the world. You can't just come in here and undo everything we've worked for." Jamal's voice grew quieter but no less firm. "The only thing you're working for is your own reputation. You're more concerned about the money and the research than you are about her life." At that, Dr. Mitchell's face tightened, his jaw clenching. "I don't have time for this," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "You're wasting my time." Jamal didn't let him walk away. "If you really cared about her, you'd listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. The liver levels are rising because of the medication. You're poisoning her. I have the proof. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." Dr. Mitchell froze. His face paled, and for a brief moment, Jamal saw the fear in his eyes. The truth was something Dr. Mitchell could never allow to come out, not with so much at stake. The money, the research, the fame, it all depended on Isabella's treatment working. If it didn't, if the public knew the truth, everything he had worked for would crumble. "You're threatening my career," Dr. Mitchell said, his voice low and dangerously calm. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, kid. I'll make sure you regret this." Jamal didn't back down. "I don't care about your career. I care about her, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she survives." The air between them crackled with tension. But just as Dr. Mitchell took a step toward him, a voice interrupted them. "Dr. Mitchell, there's been an issue in the ICU," Dr. Chen called from down the hallway, her voice steady but urgent. She walked toward them, her gaze flicking briefly to Jamal before turning to the doctor. "We need you." Dr. Mitchell's eyes narrowed, his anger still simmering beneath the surface. "This isn't over," he muttered to Jamal, before turning sharply and walking away with Dr. Chen. Jamal watched them go, a sense of unease settling in his chest. He knew that this wasn't just about Isabella anymore. It was about something much bigger, about exposing the corruption that had allowed this to happen. About standing up to the medical establishment that had failed so many people before her. Inside Isabella's room, Victoria Blackwood sat at her daughter's bedside, her eyes red from hours of crying. Isabella's condition had worsened in the last few hours. And no matter how hard she tried to stay composed, she couldn't stop the tears. She was losing her daughter, and she couldn't stop it. "Isabella," she whispered softly, stroking her daughter's hair. "Please, sweetheart, stay with me." The sound of footsteps outside the door caught her attention, and she turned to see Jamal walking in, his expression calm but filled with purpose. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jamal said softly, his voice carrying a quiet confidence. "I need to talk to you." Victoria wiped her tears and looked up at him, confused. "What are you doing here, Jamal?" "I know what's happening to Isabella," he said, his voice unwavering, "and I know how to fix it." Victoria's eyes widened. "What do you mean? What's happening to her?" "The treatment. It's killing her," Jamal said, his words striking her like a blow. "I've seen it before. The liver toxicity is rising because of the medication. But there's something I can do to help, something natural." Victoria's face turned pale as she absorbed his words. "You're telling me? You can save her?" she whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. Jamal nodded, his gaze steady. "Yes. But you have to trust me. We have to stop the drugs, and we have to start a detoxification process with the plants. I know. I can do it, but I need your help." Victoria looked at him, her mind racing, but her heart clinging to the last thread of hope. "What do you need me to do?" Jamal met her gaze. "I need you to let me help. To trust me." Dr. Mitchell's plan was already in motion, his actions veiled in secrecy, but Jamal had one thing he didn't: truth. And as long as Jamal had that, nothing could stop him. The final confrontation was coming. It was no longer just about Isabella's life, it was about exposing the corruption, about shining a light on the system that had failed her. And with every step Jamal took, he knew that he was one step closer to bringing that truth to the world. 6 months had passed since the night that Jamal had stood in the sterile halls of Mount Sinai Hospital, determined to save Isabella Blackwood. So much had changed in that short time, yet everything about Jamal remained the same. His journey had altered the course of an entire hospital, and in many ways, the course of his own life. The sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways of the hospital now felt different to him, less intimidating, more familiar. Jamal no longer needed to sneak around like a shadow in the corners. He had earned his place here. The same hospital that had once expelled him for scavenging now welcomed him as a medical research assistant. The same people who had once dismissed him as just another street kid now turned to him for guidance as he walked down the hall, his uniform pressed and his briefcase in hand. Jamal couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. His name, Jamal Washington, was now engraved on his briefcase. The boy from the streets had become the youngest medical consultant in the country's history, all because he had the courage to stand up when everyone else refused to see the truth. He had not only saved Isabella's life, but had also exposed the dark underbelly of the medical establishment that had been more interested in profits than patients. Dr. Mitchell, the doctor who had once looked down on Jamal, had been stripped of his position, his career ruined by the recordings Jamal had secretly made. The truth about the deadly experimental treatment that had been poisoning Isabella. The public outcry had been deafening. The headlines screamed of medical negligence and the exploitation of wealthy children as mere test subjects. Street Kid exposes medical corruption was splashed across every newspaper. Isabella Blackwood's case became a symbol for the failures of modern medicine, and for the unacknowledged wisdom that lay outside the walls of ivory towers. And as for Jamal, he had become something of a legend in the medical world, young prodigy whose knowledge came not from prestigious institutions but from the lessons learned on the streets and passed down through generations. Today, however, wasn't about the past. Today was about the future. Jamal had a meeting with Dr. Chen in the research lab, where the new pilot program for integrative medicine combining modern science with traditional healing methods was about to be unveiled. Jamal entered the lab with a sense of purpose, his heart beating steadily. The lab was filled with advanced equipment, high-tech monitors, and cutting-edge research materials. But it was the people, here the doctors, the researchers, who would be the real test. Would they listen to him? Would they trust in what he had taught them? Or would they continue to rely solely on their degrees and their sterile formulas? Dr. Chen stood by a large table covered with patient data, her face illuminated by the glow of the computer screen. She was scanning through the latest research results, but her eyes lifted as Jamal entered the room. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Good morning, Dr. Jamal," she greeted him warmly. "We've got some impressive results to go over today." Jamal smiled back, his confidence shining through. "I'm ready. Let's see what we've accomplished." He joined her at the table, where the two of them reviewed the latest data on patients who had undergone the new integrative treatment protocol. It was working. In fact, the results were better than anyone had expected. Recovery times had decreased significantly, and the patients were showing remarkable improvement far beyond the typical expectations of post-surgical recovery. As they spoke, Jamal's phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at it quickly, his heart skipped a beat when he saw the headline. Isabella Blackwood to start scholarship fund for children in need. He read further, his chest swelling with pride. Victoria Blackwood, now a strong advocate for alternative medicine, had taken the lessons from her daughter's near-death experience and channeled them into something greater. Isabella's recovery had not only saved her life, but had sparked a nationwide movement. The Isabella Blackwood Scholarship Fund would provide opportunities for underprivileged children to pursue careers in integrative medicine. Combining traditional and modern healing techniques, Isabella herself was now 8 years old, vibrant, and full of life. Her transformation from a frail, dying child to a healthy, laughing girl was nothing short of miraculous, and her recovery had paved the way for a future where Jamal's teachings would be recognized and respected. Dr. Chen watched Jamal as he processed the news, a proud glint in her eyes. She could see that this meant more to him than just academic success. It was personal. Isabella had become more than just a patient to Jamal, had become the catalyst for change. "I'm proud of you, Jamal," Dr. Chen said, her voice sincere. "You've not only helped save lives, you've changed the way we think about medicine. I don't think I would have believed it if someone had told me that the answer to modern medical problems could come from someone like you. But now, I see it. You've proven that true healing doesn't come from a textbook. It comes from understanding." Jamal nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "I had to do it, Dr. Chen. My grandmother always said, knowledge is only valuable if you use it to help others. I couldn't just stand by and watch. I had to make a difference." "I'm glad you did," Dr. Chen said with a smile, "and now, we're making a real difference." Just then, Alina, who had risen to the position of nursing supervisor, entered the lab with a few papers in her hand. "Hey, Dr. Jamal," she greeted him with a wide grin. "You've got a message from Victoria. She wants to meet with you in an hour. Something about a new project?" Jamal's heart skipped. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the opportunity to work even more closely with Victoria. She had been a key ally in the fight against the medical establishment. Now, she was using her influence to ensure that the lessons Jamal had taught could reach the next generation of doctors. "Thanks, Alina," Jamal said with a grin. "I'll be there." As Jamal left the lab and headed toward Victoria's office, he couldn't help but think about how far he had come. The boy who had once been invisible, the boy who had been dismissed and humiliated, was now shaping the future of medicine. And it wasn't just the hospitals and medical institutions that had changed. It was Jamal himself. He had gone from the boy who was thrown out for scavenging to the man who would now walk the halls of these very institutions as a respected figure. He wasn't just changing the medical world. He was changing what it meant to be truly healed. But Jamal knew that the real work was only just beginning. The lessons he had learned, the knowledge he carried from the streets, was just the start. There was so much more to be done, so many lives to be saved. And Jamal knew that no matter how much power, wealth, or prestige the system had, he would never stop fighting for the truth. He was the bridge between two worlds, the world of privilege and the world of struggle, and he was determined to rewrite the rules for both.